It's time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnett Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
So glad to have you join us for another hour of Cutting Edge Consciousness. This is Barnett Bain, and I'm here in studio with my good friend and co-host,
Freeman Michaels.
You got that right. So,
so far, I'm one for one.
That was well done.
Right here on the edge.
How was your week?
It was great. I've been thinking a lot about the last week's guest. We had Congressman Tim Ryan on talking about a mindful nation, his vision of a mindful nation. Specifically,
mindfulness and the sequester.
Yes.
Keep it in mind.
The stillness and the reverence to approach things with a kind of contemplative and then action. So there's an element of really sitting with and sourcing a kind of wisdom from within, and allowing the whatever's in front of us to be complex, not knee-jerk crunching it down into a small box. That for me, just in everyday life, because I love when we hit a big concept and then I scratch my head the rest of the week going, okay, how do I apply this?
You got a bald spot there.
To picking up, I've been scratching hard. Yeah. How do I approach picking up my kids from school and doing the laundry and all the, just sort of mundane things from the perspective of this this very high level, theory. I want to apply it. So I love what we talked about, and it's been an interesting week kind of playing with it, if you will, in day-to-day life.
Well, I've had an extraordinary week of births and passings.
Oh.
Over the last couple of days,
interesting.
Two of my friends have had new grandchildren. I'm talking about grandchildren all of a sudden. How's that? Remember when it was different?
Yeah. Well, grandchildren are great because you get to play with them and give them back.
That's
so
what they say.
So there's a whole spirit
well,
to the
I wouldn't know. It's not my grandchild.
Wow. Give that a minute or two.
But it's very powerful and very, very moving to be in the field of that, to be in the soup of that kind of excitement and celebration and
possibility, right?
And at the same time, so two newborns.
Yeah, that's
on the same
beautiful.
day.
On the same day, wow.
And also another friend whose granddaughter is pregnant.
They come in threes.
That's a good point. We'll have to see if that proves out over the next few days.
Yeah.
So simultaneously, some losses, some friends who have passed. And I am touched by the impact that has had on me, and it's given me pause to reflect on what is the nature of celebration. And I don't have answers for that, but I do know there is, I have experienced more deeply than ever before, a willingness to be changed by these events, a willingness to allow my feelings to be different, and to allow my thoughts to be different, and to allow my choices to be different, and my behavior to be different as a result of both what is being born and what is passing. And also I'm realizing that things are moving so swiftly in the world. There is so much change. The only thing that is certain is the uncertainty. There is so much chaos, either beautiful chaos or sorrowful chaos, depending on how one holds it.
Yeah.
That
it's all up.
That there are so many births and deaths of old ideas and beliefs and structures and ways of doing things, and that I can equally become or develop a practice of celebration vis-a-vis all of these things that are so dynamic and so in play.
So, and so it struck me when you were speaking about, we defined a miracle that everyone involved in some way is changed by it. So when you're speaking about that, and we've linked the miraculous to the mystical, that there's a way of being with the unknown where things unfold And instead of tying everything to an experience of the past, we allow them to grow and to become something new, and we meet them in a different way, right? Whatever the them is, whatever the occurrence is. And with death and birth, the making it meaningful for a moment. Because what you were just saying about now it's grandchildren, all right? Well, what does that mean? You know, how am I meeting this in a new way? Because there's an evolution. There's a, you know, you're getting a little older, so what's showing up is different. That's great. But also the eyes with which you meet it has shifted. And so, you know, when we embrace uncertainty, when we actually let this ride be what its truest potential is, there's a newness in the moments. And there's a newness to how we come to experience that opens us up.
Well, we could not have a better segue from which to introduce our guest. He's a very special guest because he's my really dear friend and playmate.
Yeah, you guys play a
He
lot.
happens to have a PhD in this area. In this case, PhD for piled higher and more deeply with more depth and breadth and wisdom to do with issues mystical and metaphysical than I think anybody that I have the pleasure to know. So I'm really, really thrilled to have my dear friend, Dr. Paul Scheele, with us this morning, who is, Paul's the chairman of Scheele Learning Systems, and he's also the founding partner of Learning Strategies Corporation, and I'm sure that that's a name very familiar to very, very many of our listeners. And for those for whom it is not yet familiar, run, don't walk, but after the show. These are companies that offer self-development products in a lot of nations, 185, 190 countries worldwide, I think. So, Paul, welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness.
Thanks a ton. Really nice to be here around the kitchen table with you two.
Yeah, right at the edge of possibility.
Pass the wine. Thank you.
So let's jump in. There's a number of things, Paul, that are right in your wheelhouse about welcoming in the moments and relationship with the mystery versus running back and defining everything from an old vantage point. In other words, the evolving self, the sort of ability to, it's a learning piece because it's a learning orientation of how we approach life. I know that's a big part of your work. I know it's the way that, you come at things. So let's just get you going. What's the perspective from your vantage point of how to approach things with a reverence for the mystery or the unknown?
Yeah. I love that idea of our roles are becoming twofold. One, we are becoming midwives of an emerging future. It's trying to be born into the world, and we're also hospice workers. And if you've had the privilege of participating in either hospice or birth, you know that there is, in the whole ethos of those two professions, and they're not even professions, they're services to humanity, that there is this deep reverence for what it's time to let something go.
Yeah.
And there's time to welcome something in that's never opened its eyes before into this world. And how do you begin to claim you know what this child is supposed to become in the world? And interestingly, in my work with organizations and leaders within those organizations, to help them do both of those, to help them leave the status quo and step into an emerging future, which is a fertile unknown. It's not something to be scared about, which has caused so many to stay focused in predicting and controlling what's supposed to happen. But it's this place of being more observant and more living with the question of who are we supposed to become.
I know you, and so I know that when you speak to this, you are not referring to a future that will simply be a better, an improved version of what has been, but you're referring to what is in fact a virgin future, something entirely brand new, something entirely innovative, that we have the relationship with which from here, I hold it as the way women, pregnant women, are in love with what is as yet unborn, but they love it. They love it, and
that's
they
a great
feed it,
concept.
They feed it care, and they feed it attention, and they feed it space, and they feed it gratitude and possibility and energies of dreaming and hoping and joy and support, and it is out of those that alchemy of frequencies that something wonderful emerges. And I know that that's what you're referring to here as well. It's not it may not look like a better version of what was best practices. It's more next practices.
Yeah, and I love that. And what really jumps out at me is that term possibility, which has shown up in a unique way for me recently. There is a cohort group that's formed out of something called the Transformational Leadership Circle that's organized here in Minneapolis and also in the Bay Area by the Heartland Group. And here are a bunch of leaders doing leadership development or leading in organizations, and we've established a cohort to begin exploring how can we become better facilitators of transformation. And of course, we haven't really defined what that means in our dialogue here yet, and perhaps we'll get to that. But what happened was I proposed something. I said, here are 6 findings from my research, and what if this was really true? What if these things were true about what it means to be facilitators of transformation? And let's explore what it would mean to bring that into our organizations, into the lives of our teams and leadership development classrooms. And what would that be? And one woman said it very nicely. She said, I like these not in order to produce some outcome, some product, but to hold a space of possibility. And there was a recent book came out on what's called The Transforming Leader. The editor of it was Carol Pearson, who wrote some books on the heroic journey, and she's the president of a university, Pacifica Graduate Institute.
Oh, that's best.
And Carol Pearson edited this, and Zachary Green, who's an associate professor down at San Diego University of San Diego. It's the oldest university in the country.
Really?
And he wrote a beautiful article in there, and he calls it Third Space.
Third space.
Yeah.
That's funny. We call it third story. Barnett and I do. Yeah, we say it's an emerging story versus first or second story. But yeah, fascinating.
It's beyond both and. It's beyond this or that. And it's this holding space of possibility. And if we could just consider that in this space that we create of possibility, here the emerging future gets to be born. And Barnett, you and I have talked a lot about eidetics as being this choice to have the emerging future guide us, rather than us standing here at the threshold saying, I'm going in there and I'm going to create this beautiful outcome. We're letting this liminal space, this place of possibility, pull us inward.
What wants to be born here? It's interesting because one of the things, and again, I want to transition back, just you maybe probably didn't hear last week's show, but the idea that what Congressman Tim Ryan, we were sharing, is a reverence for possibility, and the because when you say guided by a future that's not yet born, and I love, Barnett, what you said, a love for the unborn possibility, that there is a source, there's a way of sourcing, there's something that we can rely on to get us there. It's not a rational process. It's a mystical process, right?
Yes, and I'd love to speak to that for a moment, because I'm a definite poster child for the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant mind. Okay, and this is a mind that lives. If you walk into a church as a child, into a Protestant church, what do you see? You see this cross that's empty. You know, it doesn't have the bleeding Jesus on it. It's an empty cross, and their whole thing is, it's all about the future. You know, forget about the past. Martin Luther whacked some pages onto the Catholic doors saying, you know, enough with the suffering already.
Let's get on with it.
Let's get on with it. And
I'm going to have to interrupt for a second. So
We got to pay a couple bills.
hold that thought, Martin Luther, while we
And
pay
Paul Scheele.
while we pay a couple of bills, and we will be right back with Dr. Paul Scheele on Cutting Edge Consciousness.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And we're back here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here with Barnett Bain, with Dr. Paul Scheele. Paul, you were in the middle of a thought. I'm so sorry to cut you off, but but let's go back because it's so fascinating. We're talking about how we relate to mystery.
Martin Luther King.
No, the original Martin Luther.
so
We were talking about Martin Luther.
Yeah.
visualize this young businessman, Paul Scheele, living into the future, always subordinating the past and the present for what could be, you know, what's coming. I'm always out there somewhere. And my wife is pregnant, and suddenly I am excruciatingly and beautifully aware of the present moment, and it's a lovely thing. And I don't know what it is, but every time I'm around her, just seeing her with this introspective anticipation of this child that's going to be born, even wearing a little stethoscope and listening to his heartbeat. And when I started getting this immense revelation that this child coming in is just going to live in the present. That's all that exists for this child. The concept of the future is completely meaningless. And that's what happened to me. I really began experiencing literally every blade of grass. When I would take him out for a stroll, I would hold a blade of grass in front of him, and he would be looking at it. And I realized how magnificent every experience really was. And that welcoming of what is trying to come into the moment, trying to become aware of the moment, is really what we're talking about here.
So you referred, I want to thread this back to an earlier bookend. You referred before to the liminal place, the not this and not that state, the between state. And here's this beautiful little child, your son. Libby is carrying this child, and the child comes into the world entirely in the present, and over a period of hours, days, weeks, months, builds a inventory of self-referencing history that he begins to throw into the future and anticipating things, and starts to construct a world of logic and reason. But I know that so much of what you are about is exploring and sharing and teaching the wisdom that emerges when we are able to hold ideas beyond logic and reason without losing sight of logic and reason, without losing sight of the inventory that we begin to build from birth.
Exactly right. I mean, think about this. If an adult who has been blind since birth is suddenly given sight through some surgical process, nothing that they look at makes sense to them. They don't have the neurological building blocks of triangles, circles, and squares, and the primary colors, which are so important in infancy to start building the neurology to perceive and make sense of and order this incoming mass of wavelengths, frequencies that are bombarding the visual sense. And so you're right. It's not that we can completely cut loose from that and just go adrift. What is important to note is with this child, it's remarkable. If we go for a bike ride, he'll stop, get off his bike, get his camera out, and photograph a bug. I mean, he's never lost that capacity for appreciating the moment, which is so gorgeous for me. Of course, incredibly frustrating when I have a destination to get to, right? And I think that's part of the tension that many of us in business have. We have, in this kind of stable place of procedures, rules, policies that allow us to do our business. We're really anchoring ourselves to a status quo.
Right. And that becomes a system of processing. We're processing in a particular way. We're organizing information in a particular way that really limits us.
Right. And we're loss averse. We don't want to lose the goodies that we're creating. And
to bring a business into the liminal.
That's it. That's great. That's really good.
Is a function of what you referred to earlier as transformational processes.
There you go.
So I am very interested to hear from you how you would define this process of transformation.
Well, there's a bunch of ways in which we could talk about the process. We could talk about the definition of it.
So let me direct a little, because I feel like I can help in this, just to steer this conversation. So one of the things that we're all aware of, and Barnett alluded to it, is that what we can be certain of going forward is there's going to be more uncertainty. I think all three of us agree about that the world as we've known it is not going to be the world of tomorrow for myriad reasons. We don't have to really go into that. But enough that in order to bring a business, or really anything in our lives, into the liminal, to be able to really allow for possibility, it's the orientation towards transformation, right? It's going to take new leadership capacities. That the old models of leadership, the old models of the old systems, the old programs aren't sufficient to take us where we're going. And I think that's the thread I'd like you to sort of explore.
Okay. Well, let me kind of preface all this by saying that as we step away from that stable zone where we're doing pretty good at predicting and controlling, we step into this emergent zone, and this stepping out is where a lot of our social heretics are. These are where a lot of talk that's going on in big business is we need to honor our heretics, because they're the disruptive ones. They're the ones that are on the edge of learning and establishing new relations, new practices for creativity and innovation. Now, they are boat rockers, no question about it. And if the boat starts rocking too much, we get into this, what I would call the liminal place, this place of unpredictability, of surprise, of seemingly unconnected events, and it's very unstable and not a very comfortable place for a lot of folks. But if we could make this distinction between stasists, the ones that are trying to hold on to the status quo, and dynamists that are more oriented toward possibility, that are sensing and responding to some other pull of the future, this whatever it is that's attempting to emerge, then all of a sudden we've got this big delineation within an organization of who's trying to hang on to things and who's trying to welcome in the old.
Well, you are talking about initiating people at the same time as you yourself are pioneering and exploring entirely new capacities, new kinds of cognitions that are not necessarily mental, that both supersede, they include and transcend the capacities that we're very, very comfortable with. And you're developing relationships with entirely new, at the risk of this sounding like too heady, they're modulators with which to relate to the world. And I am interested in how you would define that
Yeah.
to an audience that is very aware of the chaos of modern life and is looking for some answers, looking for a pole star.
So kind of the big term here is what I would call dynamic steering. And if you think about the folks that are out on their surfboards on the coast, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all lined up. If you ever step out onto a pier and you go to that place where they're all lined up, they're at a threshold. They're at a liminal space right there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're purposefully there for the reason that the biggest waves are going to start unfolding right around there. This is the place where most of the action is, and this is exciting to them.
That's great.
Where most of us, chaos, what?
Right.
They're going, unpredictability, yeah, that's it. That's where I want to go. So the surfers are there. When the wave starts emerging on this event horizon for us, right, and we start to see that out there, that big swell, it's, oh, good. It's not, oh, no. It's, yeah. Here it comes. So what do? You start paddling as fast as you can to try to get your momentum close to the momentum of that wave. And then right as it starts to curl underneath you, you hop up onto the surfboard and drop into the front face of that. So this potential energy of the wave turns into kinetic energy that actually propels you to where you want to go. And that's the good news. That's the fun news, you see. And so if you could think about that dynamic, what does it mean to live within our institutions, our organizations, our well-established systems, instead of being in a predict and control mode, to be in a dynamic steering mode where we're observing, we're inquiring, we're doing adaptive work that allows us to capture the energy that's emerging at the moment.
I love it. And what we've talked about a lot on this show, you know, from the standpoint of consciousness is from my perspective, and Barnett and I have talked a lot about this, is building a kind of awareness along with skills to be able to handle what we call dynamic complexity, where things are always changing and they have layers and layers of complexity. We're not tied to, you know, one definition. We can hold things as true and not true simultaneously. We've made a friend of paradox. We're okay with it. We sit in the middle and go, wow, it could go either way. What you're talking about, and I love this, is because I love the idea of flow. I love the idea of riding something, and especially the wave, the frothy, you know, splashing, you know, white cap of that, because that is the level at which we're going to be bounced around, at least in my experience. That's the way of, you know, walking into uncertainty, going, I'm open to possibility, is inherently, as you put it earlier, uncomfortable. But there's a point at which, with a sense that there's a possibility, a love that we sort of talked about for this possibility, where I'm willing to handle that. I mean, a woman who's going to give birth knows, you know, this is going to be a ride, you know, especially the first baby who's never experienced that level. I mean, her body's going to transform, that level of transformation physically. I see that metaphorically for the kind of consciousness that we three men are interested in birthing.
Well, what's fascinating is a lot of women get to the point where the birth is got to happen, and many of them say, can I get out of this, please?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, no, you got to go through it, actually.
Well, and everyone that pops up the other side says, wow, that was one of the most amazing things that ever happened in my life.
Exactly. As soon as our children were born, as she was getting cleaned up after the birth, she said, I'd do that again. I said, please, let me recover first.
Yeah, let you recover. That's hysterical.
Yeah, that wasn't so hard.
Yeah, no.
That wasn't so hard.
So let me tell you that there are these 6 things that came out of my dissertation research that really do help to perpetuate this sort of welcoming. Not only the hospice work of releasing, but also the welcoming. So the first is to actively surface the disruptive and disorienting dilemmas that are showing up, to really talk about them, go into dialogue about them. Second is to create a safe environment for critical reflection. I mean, what we're doing here in our dialogue is we're critically reflecting on some of the values that keep us bound to status quo and some of the values that help us be more in tune with and make the distinctions that help us succeed in an emerging future. The third is to encourage people to actively challenge their mental models or habits of expectation, and really giving them data that challenge the current assumptions and give us an opportunity for this collaboration that we're having right now around the kitchen table, this collaborative inquiry about what is this thing that's here now. We don't even have the words to define it yet, but we know deeply what that is. The fourth is to really help people express their new awareness and perspectives through, number one, deep listening, but secondly, through this kind of dialogue. We're discoursing, and as a result, starting to put language to what it is that we're all perceiving. And the fifth is to eliminate innovative ideas, new ways of thinking, and perspectives that are becoming apparent to us. And finally is acknowledging bold and courageous plans to act. Like you had on Congressman Ryan's call, you referred to that as, wow, here's a choice to act or not act based on a very bold recognition of what's showing up. So acknowledging bold and courageous plans to act by highlighting commitments to take concrete steps, no matter how small, that contribute to a greater collective response. And that, to me, was probably the most exciting thing about my research of the population that I studied in my dissertation, is that people recognize that a very small act in their life was actually part of a contribution to a much bigger collective response that's showing up on the planet.
I love it.
So every act ripples across eternity.
Every thought.
Now, it strikes me as you're sharing these 6 points that each one can be unpacked as a curriculum at depth, and I know that you have done that, and I hope that you'll accept our invitation to come back and start unpacking them tranche at a time.
Perfect. I'd love to.
And maybe you'll do it in studio if we can get you in
Yeah,
town.
if we get you into Los Angeles, that'd be fantastic.
We'll be there.
So we are running against a very hard break here. I'm very, very grateful that you joined us here this morning. Freeman is beaming.
Absolutely.
And making copious notes.
Yeah, and I want to be sure we give folks the website.
Yes. Where can folks learn more about the work of Dr. Paul Scheele?
ScheeleLearning.com. It's SCHEELE. ScheeleLearning.com.
And, of course, all this will be available on the Cutting Edge Consciousness website. Paul, thank you so much for spending the time
Big
with us.
hug to Libby. Lots of love. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Barnett and Freeman. Bye.
And for those of you listening, stay tuned because we'll be right back after these messages.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And we're back.
We're back here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. This is Barnett. I'm here with my my colleague, Freeman Michaels, the social heretic.
I love that. That's fantastic. Social heretic.
It feels like a biker name. It's like a bunch of guys in with leather jackets on Harleys.
The idea that it's disruptive, I guess, is okay because we're midwifing an emerging world that's waiting to be born, and simultaneously we're hospice workers helping with the transition, right? Letting go and helping to step into this profound mystery, the great thereafter or whatever. So I love...
It is disruptive.
It is.
It does not have to be catastrophic.
Right.
It does not have to be... it does not have to be as painful.
Right.
As it might be, but it is disruptive because it is putting the clutch in on some habituated responses and thinking, and assumptions
Yeah.
that are so fundamental to how we operate as human beings, and that is very challenging. Look, there was a time when it was widely held that the world was flat.
Yep.
And that is that was a very disruptive idea that the world might not be flat. There was a time when, not very long ago, when women were considered to be not worthy of the vote.
Okay.
Women to this day are still not, they're not granted a level playing field in many ways. And so we still have ways to go around that, and that will be one of the kinds of disruptive, emergent paradigms that we are growing into.
Yeah, but there's one thing that we've brought up time and time again, which is, and this is, again, we talk about it in terms of the collective experience, but we look at it in terms of a mirror, so it's reflective of a part inside of us, where there's an aspect within me that's hanging on to the status quo, right? And Paul made this point. There's the status folks, and there's the status part within me that's trying to keep this homeostasis, that's trying to keep things together. It feels very much like that sometimes, like, I'm holding it together. But there's another part of me that's the dynamist, right? That's got this, hunger for something yet unborn, that understands that I give up some comfort in favor of something that has such a big offer on the other side of it. But
you don't have to give up anything.
Right. Well, no, I get that. Yes, a good point. But all I was trying to say is, within my own experience, compassion for the part of me that's scared, that wants to hold it all together. I get that. But enough courage, enough heart to step into the possibility again and again and again. And it's a daily activity, right? This show is the edge of possibility. We know that our greatest future is beyond the edge of what we currently hold as true. There's something yet unknown that we've oriented towards, and we've set ourselves up in a particular way that's what we're going towards, even though part of us is going kicking and screaming.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I wanted to say that we're not demonizing within myself or in the collective folks who are scared. We understand it. We've said it's developmental. We get the part of us that doesn't want things to change, that likes the old story. And it's okay. We take care of that part. We hold it. We have compassion for it as we move forward.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's beautifully said. What came up for me as you were speaking that is the realization that what begins as a personal process, perhaps there's so many ways to come to it. In my case, it began with a psychological exploration that developed into a spiritual exploration and a spiritual and metaphysical and consciousness exploration, but was still, how can I fix myself?
Right.
So what begins as a personal process at some point flips into being a world process.
Yes.
It just flips all by itself, and the world becomes a hall of mirrors.
Yeah.
I was driving up here this morning and thinking how gorgeous the sea looks and how beautiful that was, and realizing, God, the feeling of that, the beauty of that, well, that's me. And I felt wonderful. And then I looked over to the right and I saw the fields, and there were all these migrant laborers who are pulling all of the vegetables out of the fields. And I thought, my God, that is crushing work. And I had some assessments and beliefs and judgments that I laid on, is that right or is that wrong? And then I realized, well, and that part too, the discomfort of that is equally, just as a moment earlier, I was looking in my world and mirroring and relating to, tuning to what was so beautiful. Now I was tuning to something that was confusing to me, and around which I didn't have easy answers, and was complex. and the discomfort of that. So the world, I guess what I'm saying is I am forging a deeper, more, a closer relationship with what I am experiencing in the world, allowing it to move me more deeply, but in an aware way, and asking myself, well, what is this reflecting in me? And I'm not really clear where one thing begins and the other, one thing starts and stops. I'm not really clear which part is me and which part isn't me.
Well, and there's an important point here that we've made a number of times in the show, and I want to make it again. We talk about personalizing everything because, one of the propensities is to want to point out there and make it about what's happening out there, which if we can't own it as a reflection of us, we're not empowered to shift it or change it or have any impact on it. So I just want to make that point again, that as we personalize it, then we can handle and choose effectively in terms of the out there, as it were, but the trip cord is to want to make it out there, as opposed to what you're talking about, going through the experience of, wow, this is me and that's me and that's me, and that's the empowered perspective. And that's the way where we have the greatest impact on whatever we're calling out there, that we're actually really aware of our own filtering, of our own status, reorganizing around the status quo again and again and again, and how much that happens. It's my own relationship with uncertainty. It's my own intimacy with the feelings that come up and the patterning, the patterns of perception, the patterns of behavior, the emotional patterns, the scripts I'm running with other folks and all the roles they play. To the degree I have that level of self-awareness, now I can really become a collaborator and a co-creator and a contributor in whatever collective experience I'm in favor of, whenever I want to generate and create, which is the place I think that Paul Scheele was talking about ultimately, that we're at this amazing moment in time, midwife in emerging world, at the same time caring for the broken pieces as we know they're meant to fall away because they won't serve where we're going.
So it requires some discernment. There's a tendency sometimes to want to bypass things in the name of the oneness.
Right.
And so it's all one and it's all fun and it's all great. And I have not found that has served me very well. But when I allow myself to differentiate, to split it off so that I can develop a relationship first and feel my feelings as deeply as I can and then allow them to go, then I can integrate. But to bypass you don't integrate what you don't know.
That's it.
So it's this kind of in breath out. It's in out, and honestly, I would never presume to say that this is a technique and now we have it figured out. But it's certain this has been of tremendous value to me, and will be until it isn't anymore. And I will have expanded to a place of discovering something more about myself and something new.
And in that moment, you become more responsible in your own decision making and more reliable as a generator of possibilities.
So say more about that.
Well, what Paul
exactly
was talking
why.
about, Paul gave us 6 sort of benchmarks, qualities, characteristics of the process of of becoming a leader in an emerging possibility, with a sense of there's something that we want to generate and create, and we're moving towards that based on these 6 fundamental keys, if you will, moving forward. So again, we both do this. We both work with the material, other people's, our own, and are worked by it, because we understand that it's always about moving back into the liminal state. And like the surfer analogy, there's a number of skills. You got to be able to hop up on the board. You got to be able to paddle out. You got to have enough wisdom and knowledge to be able to navigate whatever variables.
And
so
there's
that you
a
can
point at
get
which
there.
you got to know when to let the dream stealer lift what is no longer an appropriate story that you're holding about yourself. So I
love that
I
language,
know
the dream
folks
stealer.
I'm not casting aspersions here, but there's this old joke about Woody Allen. I don't know whether he's still in therapy. But there was a time when he was in therapy when it was widely known that he was in therapy like 3 or 4 or 5 times a week for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so there's certainly enormous value there. And at some point, there is diminishing value there.
Right.
And at some point, you are pumping the same septic system.
You're feeding the neurosis.
There comes a point, likewise, in differentiating and understanding the territory of what we have called on the show those in the bus and the fractured self and the fragments. There's lots of names for it, of identifying them and their motives and what drives them and what's formed them, and processing behaviors. And then eventually there comes the point when we realize, well, let's move beyond processing. I have enough. I know how to ride this bicycle sufficiently that I can kick off the training wheels and rise to the next challenge, which is, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I do create it all,
Yep.
Which is a mantra of this program, is that we create it all 100%, no caveats, no pushbacks, no qualifications. And when we begun to become closer and closer to embracing the truth of that, what becomes apparent is I don't create it all, but there's only an objective reality that is beyond, inside the world of logic and reason. I create it 100%, and until I can begin to breathe the air and swim in the waters beyond logic and reason, I do create it all. And beyond that, there is some sort of objective mysticism.
Yeah.
That's where the realm of the mystics lie. The mystery is this side. The other side of logic and reason is the realm of mysticism, and that I don't create it all. I understand that I'm a co-creator there, but that's not first-hand knowledge.
Yep. And knowing that is helpful as well. That there's a place beyond, beyond where I'm owning it all to where I don't.
And we don't. What did you used to call it? Premature
transcendence syndrome.
We don't jump.
No, we can't. Well, we do sometimes, and we track back. We go, wow, I was skipping a step there. I mean, look, every time I feel like I've got it, there's this, collapsing moment where I'm like, okay, maybe I don't, but I've got so one of the things you and I've said in our personal lives is those moments where whatever the status gets rocked again, and we're feeling like, we're really in the discomfort of, moving back into liminal, that there's, having been through it, just like having given birth, we know this moment. We know this moment in the process, right? We know that in a moment here, it'll pop through and there'll be this thing that's been born. In the analogy, it would be a baby, but in the case of whatever we're generating, creating, we know that there's some, there's contractions and there's pushing and there's all kinds of things, and then we're popped through. But having done that a number of times, it's okay. And if I go back to the whole meeting with the status quo, the reorganizing back to a status quo, reorganizing it back to the status quo within myself, and then I see it reflected in all the other folks, and I'm intimate with the part of me that's scared, that wants to do that, and I understand it, and I go, oh, yeah, okay. It's not as dramatic. And the fact that there's always this moment, or at least there has been for me, these reoccurring moments before birth of chaos and discomfort and everything's changing. I'm transforming. What Paul was talking about the embracing of the transforming, that's the big gig, that we actually recognize that the transformation is the bigger game,
Well, our producer has walked out of the studio, so we have no idea what time it is, but I suspect that we need to get the heck out of here.
Yeah, we're going to do that. So we're going to call this a show. We're grateful that you came and spent the time with us. We invite you to keep coming back to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Thanks for listening.